My name is Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Hogan. And this is a Finance Committee meeting for the purposes of discussing the auditor's recent report, specifically relating to the performance audit of the Syracuse Police Department COVID-19 procedures. So Mr. Auditor, I mean, if you want to start and just kind of give an overview or just kind of a narrative of the audit, I think that's probably the best place to start.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Green. And the other Councilor Hogan, is it those the two who are on? Well, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of give you an overview of what we did as a request from you all, from the council, back on September 25th. Actually, it's a date that I'll remember, not only because you asked it on a date, but it happens to be my son's birthday. So it was an easy day to remember. I believe the timing of the report, as I said, it took longer than what I felt was necessary. I recognize that the police were working with doing other issues that they were handling, and then they admitted as much in their responses to us, but it did take far too long. And I think substantively, the importance of what we did was an appropriate review of, and hopefully a productive and positive one for all members involved, from the administration and the police department. I'm sure you saw in our report the findings that we had and the recommendations. And then as tradition has it, and what we do is when we issue the report, the final report, it includes the management administrative responses. So I hope you've had a chance to read through them. I guess in terms of significance is that there wasn't a policy established, and currently there isn't one to review, which is also something of concern. However, the administration has said that within 60 days from issuance of the report, that there will be a policy drawn up, and I'm hoping that they will do some kind of review of, based on that policy is developed, they'll do some review of what occurred during that period of time that we did our inquiry. And I think that'd be sometime in June when they should have that report, and I would encourage the council at that time to have a subsequent meeting to maybe take a look at it in terms of the plan. And relative to the findings of it, as I said, there wasn't a plan, and there's some inconsistency in the reporting, whether the mayor, deputy mayor, the administration was involved in those in developing of the plan. If you look on pages 43, 44, 45, 46 of the document, you will see that sometimes the chief says that the administration was not involved, and there are other times where they say that the administration was involved. So there's some ambiguity there. One other thing of note, I had asked the chief and the police department for a copy of their policy relating to police officers not being furloughed. Having been a counselor over the years, I was aware that that was something that had been floated out there. I never have seen a document that says that. There's nothing in the current agreement that the police PBA has with the city. And I say agreement because it's not a contract. It's an agreement that's been extended and amended over the years because, as you know, it's not currently in arbitration. So I think that's something important going forward that should be established, whether or not police and fire can be furloughed under, and if they can or can't, under what circumstances they can and they can't. So that, as you see on my timeline in my Appendix E, I had requested that a copy of that. I had talked to the chief about it, but we never received a copy of it. So that's an unanswered question as well. I think the third area of that I mentioned is the whole idea of whether or not the council should have been informed about this change of policy is subject to debate, I guess, based on the response from the administration. Again, calling on my years as a counselor and trying to be respectful of all of you, it seems to me that something of this nature, given the fact that there was an expense, quite a considerable expense to the taxpayer, as well as from just for pay for on-call, but overtime that was also provided, that's something that should have been, in my view, run by the council. The police department cites the fact that they say that within the charter that they didn't have to legally come to the council. And what they cite in there is that they talk about with the approval of the mayor. But as I stated in my first point, there's ambiguity about whether the mayor was involved in these discussions or not. It clearly says that he wasn't, according to the police department, but then there's also a reference to Chief Buckner saying that he doesn't recall his conversations with the mayor about the policy and implementation. So again, if you're citing from the charter that you don't have a legal responsibility, yet you're citing the charter, which suggests that you cannot do this without the approval of the mayor, it seems to me to be contradictory statements and something that I think that the council deserves. I think the taxpayers deserve the transparency that was involved in budgetary decisions that were there. The issue of the on-call on a moment's notice, again, you know, and most of you know me, I'm pretty much a common sense person, and I try, and our office tries to take approach of understanding and being objective about this. But I'm really confused, and as I used to say on the council, I'm so confused because this on-call policy said that officers would be called in on a moment's notice, and I don't know how that could occur, given the fact of the geography of where these officers live. As we all know, many of the officers live outside of the city, outside of the county. And so on a moment's notice, and the fact that there was no specific time given for the officers to report for duty, again, was ambiguous, and it doesn't allow for any accountability, in my judgment, for when an officer would be available should they need to be called in. The other area was of concern that I felt from a public health safety issue was that there really wasn't any interaction with the Onondaga County Health Department. Again, that's Onondaga County, as we all know, was the main facilitator of all of what we were doing in the county at the directive, obviously, of the CDC and of the state. But I would think going forward, if we ever face this again, that the county health department would be intricately involved and helpful and resourceful, and we should call on them. So I think those kind of cover, I think, both the findings and the recommendations that we made. And so I'll leave it there, and then if there's questions or as the questions come up, I'm happy to answer any of them.
Thank you, Mr. Otter. So I'll start with one, and then I'll open it up to my colleagues. So I guess putting this in context a little bit, I mean, I certainly received complaints, and I'm sure some of my colleagues did as well, as just anecdotal citizens would encounter officers at the height of the COVID pandemic, and mask wearing was a little inconsistent. That was something we saw. And then, you know, there's been reports now where it's actually less than half of our officers have gotten the vaccine, despite being one of the first groups of people that are eligible. So to me, this is all to say that if in the context of COVID, the police department had been hyper vigilant and hyper precautious about reducing the risk, then this type of somewhat extreme measure seems more appropriate. But it seems as though like this is the one thing that they've done to try to reduce the risk and the spread. And other than that, there hasn't been other policies or other, enforcement. And I'm just kind of curious if in your investigation you came across other things that the police department was doing that was unique to try to stop the spread of COVID, or was this kind of their one thing they did?
Well, let me respond to the first part of your context. The inconsistencies in terms of what was said, that the idea of going to an on-call policy was to potentially prevent the spread of officers getting infected, and as was cited by the police department, was that across the country, many first responders, police, fire, emergency people were being exposed, obviously, to the pandemic, and so that's a legitimate concern and one that I think is fair to recognize. However, the inconsistency during this time period of the mask face coverings it was seen by the taxpayers, was identified in photos by the news media. So the accountability factor of officers with that is I think, relevant. And I think the police department understands that, and ultimately have attempted to address that. Relative to other things that, from a safety standpoint, that the police department could have done, as I said, that would have benefited the taxpayer as well as perhaps been beneficial from a health standpoint, is there were other assignments that they could have made, and so as not to put people on call as much and then subsequently have overtime. So that's, again, the absence of a plan, and it was cited from the police response and a couple of questions that it was a lesson learned on certain things, and we're human, and I understand that. But I think by time of March, the end of March, when this was put in place, there was certainly enough time, January, February, this was known, and across the country, it was, I think, known. So a more detailed in terms of the plan of action should have been in place, and there should have been less ambiguity for the safety of the police officers. About people being vaccinated, that's a personal choice. I don't know how to respond to that. Other than I think I would put out there that I think we all should do it, for all of us.
Thank you. Other counselors with questions?
Mr. Green, if I could.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, to the point of Audit Maroon's report, the key question here is relative to the $293,000 and whether the process by which it was spent was appropriate according to our charter and/or rules. And, I share the same concern that the auditor expressed and that others have expressed. And so, I don't know if Corporation Counsel is on, but, maybe they can draw a distinction for us. When any other time, line items have to be moved over, money is shifted around and used for purposes other than what it was allowed, the council, those items come before the council for its approval. And somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been here a long time, and I believe we voted a lot of times in that respect. And then all of a sudden, with due respect, that rule no longer applies in this instance. And while I understood the argument by the chief and maybe even corp counsel about the extreme circumstances and the power that he has as a chief as it relates to police powers, he does not have fiduciary powers. And so if somebody could clarify or provide a distinction between the many other times when line items were moved or shifted and used for purposes other than what they were intended, the need to come to the council, and then now the need not to come to the council. I don't think that there is, and I've read the charter, and I know Nader read the charter. I know others, I'm sure Councilor Green and others have read it. I don't believe anything makes a reference to any kind of policy that the police would have over money. And so if anybody can provide a distinction and clarify where that exists and how that rule seems to have changed at this point, I'll certainly be interested in hearing it.
Well, Councilor Bay, let me step in and try to share some light on it. And you raise a good question asking Corporation Counsel to interpret. As I mentioned at the outset, the justification for what was done relative to the money was cited as that the charter says with the approval of the mayor. That, and with all of us, that's with any department, that's always been the case, that during the course of the fiscal year, if there's any changes to your budget, you would have to go through a process for authorization to do that. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure relative to what Corporation Counsel would say in this instance. If there was approval by the mayor to do this, then that's their justification for it. Whether or not that constitutes whether or not that they would have to come to the council, I don't know the question to that. As I said, there's ambiguity whether or not the mayor was involved in any of this decision making and this policy. I asked both verbally and in writing for information about that, and I got different answers only from the chief on it and from the police department. So,
yeah, Councilor Maroon, you are correct in regards to proper protocol for the administration. But correct me if I'm wrong. Even then, we know that they can't. The mayor runs is the boss, if you will, over the departments. So of course we know that they can't just, with all due respect, willy-nilly move and use money.
right.
But even still, with those moments when the mayor would make their decision, it came to the council for its approval. I don't ever recall a moment, and again, Nada, you've been here longer than me. You could let me know if I'm missing something. I don't ever recall a moment where this type of action has happened. Again, we understand the circumstances are different, but I don't know of any rule that speaks to these circumstances and the chief's ability to control money. And you made clear that there's some ambiguity about whether the mayor was involved or not. There's a denial of the mayor's knowledge, but then, money was moved and there's, I don't know. You can say, obviously, Mr. Auditor, that the mayor didn't know, but then argue that, well, the mayor has the right to move money and doesn't have to ask the council. I don't know where that power comes from. We have a balance of powers. We have checks and balances for that very reason. And so even if the mayor, of course, understandably, is the last say as it relates to the department's actions, the council is the last say as it relates to the purse. And that's a clarification I think we need.
I would agree with that, and I think that the council should pursue that and to get that clarification because you make this salient point that this is the taxpayers' money and how it's spent and what it's intended, and if this is some deviation from the original intent of the budget, and clarification needs to be had. I agree.
I yield, Councilor Green.
Other councilors with questions?
Councilor Green, if I could,
Go ahead, Councilor.
I just want to make note for people that might view this later that nobody from the administrative staff of the mayor's office is here, nor anybody from the police command structure, I believe, on the call, which is very unusual in my experience as a city councilor, and more or less concerning. Along with Councilor Bay's comments, my comments, the closest thing in my memory to a situation like this was when the windstorm devastated the city of Syracuse. and literally communication was cut. And it was a special event in the history of this town. A different effect it had than this recent pandemic, which is of course worldwide. But this city was devastated, and we didn't have power, and we worried about water and a few other things. At that point, this mayor's office controlled all the city departments, and there was a coordination of policy among all the city departments that was needed. The director of operations at that time was Joe Nicoletti, and everything passed through the mayor's office. So I'm particularly disturbed that it doesn't. There seems to be, and let's face it, ambiguity or whatever. The mayor's a murky response from the mayor's office regarding whether he knew about this policy. I mean, this is, to me, is unheard of. And was there any indication, auditor, that a situation like that would be corrected? Have they developed any kind of policy in case, God forbid, we have another situation like this?
Councilor Hogan, in their response to our initial report, they agreed that there should have been a policy and that there wasn't one, and that they would have a new policy prepared within 60 days from when we issued the report. So there isn't one in place that I know of, that I have seen, but by the June 21st or something of that time frame, they should have, according to them, they should have a policy document, a plan in place for something like this going forward.
And if I just could add as an addendum, that every city councilor at that time, back in the 90s, when that storm hit the city, was fully aware of what the city's policies were. There was a state of emergency at that point, where stay-at-home orders. And I'm also still very concerned that the chief health department officer in the county of Onondaga was unaware of the particular policy and hadn't approved of it. And the response to me, that I don't even know what the response was from the police chief, and it didn't seem like that was was that clearly enunciated?
Yeah, that there was, they checked with Onondaga County Health Department once, from what I could glean, but on any ongoing discussions or involvement or recommendations or resource, no, none.
Okay. So this was just an arbitrary decision made by the police chief to send officers home.
Correct.
Okay. Your report is one of the most thorough I've ever seen, and I congratulate you on it, auditor. I have no more questions. Thank you, Councilor Green.
Thanks. And Mr. Auditor, so to kind of piggyback on Councilor Hogan's question here, obviously there's similar departments where there were essential employees need to come in, picking up the fire department. So essentially it was a decentralized decision that each department is making its own health decisions, right? There's no coordinated, here's the policy of the city as to how we're going to treat COVID employees.
I can't answer that. I can't verify that because we did not look into what the what the fire department did, or any water, DPW, essential. We didn't look to see what the policy was for a centralized, coordinated effort about that. The mayor did issue a statement early on, middle of March, March 16th, 17th timeframe, about reducing staff's exposure. But beyond that, I've not seen or heard, nor did we pursue to see what there was in the way of a centralized policy for public health safety for our essential workers. It's a great question, by the way. It's
You
something
know,
probably should be looked at.
I mean, to Councilor Green's question, and what I had tried to get at is that's exactly the point. As many of us longtime city employees realize that department employees work with other departments' employees. And if there wasn't a centralized policy regarding how all the departments interacted with each other, maybe we dodged a bullet there. Because that's the way things work. You know, if I don't have to do it, I don't have to do it. Why does the water department have to do it? That type of thing. So, you know, I don't know if that was if there was a clear policy. I would hope it wasn't decentralized. I hope the police department was only the outlier here. So,
Well, and I think that's exactly the point, right? Is Chief Buckner, Chief Mons, Commissioner Robinson, Commissioner Awald have no health experience. So to expect them to make individual medical research, determine what to do, is kind of a recipe for chaos, in my opinion.
Councilors Brad O'Connor here, Commissioner of Finance. There was a centralized policy. I'm sure somebody could dig it up and send it to you.
Was
it was sent to all departments, Brad?
It was. There was a central citywide policy. You know, I don't want to speak too much to the specifics because it was something that was developed by the mayor's office and personnel in conjunction with the Onondaga County Health Department. But I can dig into that answer a bit more. But there was a centralized policy.
Well, we'd like to see it if we could.
Okay.
Brad, just as a follow-up, because when you say a centralized policy, as it was relating to similar to the police department for placing people on call?
No, just a general health and safety policy.
Oh, okay. That was just the distinction. Maybe I'm not understanding the tenor of the questions, but I guess I was thinking that it was a policy relative to essential workers and an on-call policy versus public safety health or public health safety for all employees. I think there's a distinction, at least in my mind's eye. I don't know, Councilor Green and Councilor Hogan.
Yeah, I don't think Chief Buckner made this decision based on the policy that went out. That's what I'm really driving at. There is a general policy of like try to keep your distance, try to wear masks, those things, but there wasn't a policy of we're going to have people on call because of these reasons. That's mine.
And to Councilor Green's point, I imagine every operational department, every department's unique in their operational nature. But what I might want to say is obvious. I think the mayor was probably, I would hope, was aware of each department's operational policy as regards to this pandemic. But I guess he wasn't aware of the police department's operational policy to that extent. Would you agree with me, Auditor Maroon?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay.
Other questions from councilors? Okay. If not, well, Mr. Auditor, I really appreciate your work on this. I think it's a valuable service for the city and for the taxpayers. And then we do have our next one. I think it's tomorrow, right? The workers' comp audit as well. So we'll be going through that one. So
Okay.
all right. Well, I appreciate everyone's time and attention to this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.